Good afternoon, everyone, because it's the final event in Ithaca Sounding 2020, which has been a 4-day festival I organized with the help of many, many people. I'm really interested in literature. I pretty much, whenever I'm reading something that's not for work, I'm reading novels or short stories. And in the context of this festival, which is celebrating the music by Ithacans from the last 80 years or so, it was a real pleasure and surprise to discover that Anne Silsby was actually better known as a poet than a composer, even though, as we heard on Friday night, and as I've come to know, her music is also really very wonderful. So I knew I wanted to do something involving her poetry, and the fact that our own David Borden has been writing these very fun and interesting memoirs that have yet to be published. And then my friend and pianist Adam Tendler has published 2 books that are really fascinating and beautiful that I came to read over the last year. It kind of just seemed appropriate that this event sort of be our cozy little capstone to the weekend. So after a weekend of thinking about music and talking about music in the academy and experimental traditions and having 5 separate concerts, it's really lovely now to actually relish in the music of the written and spoken word. And to finish out our readings today is someone who, if you've been coming to other festival events, you've probably already heard quite a lot from in his musical performances, Adam Tendler. And when I met Adam a year and a half ago here in Ithaca, he was doing archival research in the Palmer Archives at Cornell, and I had known about him and his career before that, actually from an interview he did with Brett Banducci on the Classical Chops podcast. And about half of the interview was actually focused on his work as an author. And I subsequently got books 8850 and Tide Pools, and they are at turns heartbreaking and hilarious and deeply relatable, even like for me as a pianist with a sort of similar career trajectory, but also I think for everyone living in contemporary America, or especially the Northeast of America. So I'd like to welcome Adam Tendler.
Thank you, Richard. I want to just congratulate Richard on this festival. There's sort of a, in yoga terms, sort of like a savasana-like quality to this event. It feels very quiet, and it feels like, if you've been part of this festival, like a really nice sort of coming together, and just to let it sort of sink in. I'm kind of choked up even thinking about that. And it's a beautifully conceived festival. I'm really proud to have been a part of it. And I also really think this is a beautiful event. Composers and pianists, but just musicians, there is a long tradition historically of them writing books. It's just super not unusual, or essays. One doesn't see that too much anymore, and I do think it's actually it's a nice sort of genre to explore, a nice practice to explore. There's also, I'm finding sometimes, sort of a simplistic or sort of a binary way of thinking, like one can only be good at one thing, or one can only sort of fully cultivate or commit themselves to one thing. And actually hearing Anne Silsby's work as a poet is just so startling, because I've spent the whole weekend, for instance, knowing her as a pianist or knowing her as a composer. And I just find it really refreshing to think that in our lives there's room for all, in our garden, for full committal to all sorts of practice. And then finally, just before I start, I've spent a bit of time this weekend in sort of the archives in the Cornell Library, and whenever I leave that archive and spend a lot of time around written word, like letters, I'm always taken with how little I write on pages now, and how much of the history of the people I'm interested in have been captured in physical objects, and how much of what we communicate with right now, and how much of what we do in our lives is digital and sort of hidden, and could very easily be lost to history. I don't know where I'm going with that point, but I always think when I leave here, well, what about the archives of such and such composer who's a friend of mine? Like, what will that look like? And would he or she really say to someone handling their papers, here's my email password, go to town? Like, how many of us would do that? Or here's all my texts. You know, it's a pretty startling when composers hand their archive over. I'm always taken by what's in there. And I think it's a courageous and brave act, and it's something just to explore how much we physically leave behind and how much we're all willing to share, even just in our own lives. I've written 2 books. One documents and sort of narrates a 50-state tour that I did out of my car when I was in my early 20s. With no funding, and it was all American music, and it was sort of also a coming out sort of narratives. That's 88 by 50. And then the newer one is called Tide Pools, and that's more of a collection. They're both like my children, and this is sort of firstborn, and I really micromanaged their life, and then secondborn is like kind of rebellious and does whatever it wants. And I'm letting sort of them lead those 2 separate lives. But I'm using chance operations to determine which book I'll read from and which chapter I'll read from. And so we're going to see. I'm going to do it all live. On being called a faggot like all the time in New York City. I have a serious question for you. Is the way I look at my phone gay? I only ask because earlier today on a Downtown 6, I was standing there crafting a press release on my phone when a guy got on at 23rd Street, promptly muttered the word faggot, and then sat in front of me. Standing there, quite buttoned up, as it were, on my way to teach, I wondered if what had just happened had actually happened. Did I imagine him regarding me upon his entrance before making that so very effortless acknowledgement? Did I imagine his disdainful glare continuing at that very moment? I stared back, hoping he'd say it again. Then I'd know for sure. Then I'd say something. Then I'd be the radical queer activist I had imagined myself becoming, especially over the last couple weeks since the Pulse shooting in Orlando, talking my big game on social media and over coffee to my friends. Then I'd put my enough is enough money where my mouth is. I had a couple sentences ready. They burned in my chest. I would finally stand up for myself. But we were deadlocked. And we remained deadlocked, and I remained swimming in equal parts anger, doubt, and rationalizations. Say it again. But he didn't. I got off at Astor Place, expecting even then for him to repeat the word as I exited. I had sentences planned for that too, but nothing happened. Maybe none of it happened. Maybe I'm going crazy. I'd planned on grabbing a salad before teaching, but suddenly had lost my appetite. Maybe a smoothie? A gay smoothie? Fuck. See, this is what actually pisses me off. That mine is not a story of courage, but rather a story where the bad guy wins and I don't get a salad. Where he goes on with his day unpunished and unembarrassed while my brain remains absolutely poisoned. In this moment, I don't feel like a faggot. I feel like a coward. I actually get called a faggot quite a bit these days. Before New York, I lived in Texas and Indiana, conservative states, right? It never happened once. Growing up in Vermont, it happened regularly enough that I monitored the frequency like a scientist. But since moving to the Big Apple, off the top of my head, there was that time on a bike with one of my friends near Chinatown. Once on the sidewalk near Times Square, I bumped into one of those people handing out newspapers, so he called me a faggot. Once coming out of the subway station at Union Square, another time on the subway in Brooklyn, and then the time on the Upper West Side while running to a friend's gig at a church. More may come to me. A couple weeks ago, 2 blocks from my apartment in a convenience store. A kid wanted money, but I didn't have cash. Faggot. I came away from these experiences the same way I came away from today, wondering honestly if I run gay, sit gay, ride a bike gay, bump into people gay, walk up the stairs gay, buy chips gay, type press releases into my phone gay. Do my straight friends get called a faggot when they too run down the street or type into their phone on the subway? Or am I really truly just so gay that it seeps through my every movement, overwhelming my various forms of straight drag? I also come away from these situations seething with anger, at myself that is. I replay fantasies in my mind where I handle things differently, where I demand some kind of, no, not an apology, fuck that, but where I go into some kind of Steven Seagal mode and give these people just a small taste of the humiliation triggered in an adult like me when that word resurfaces after a bully-conditioned childhood once peppered with it. Yes, every time it's shouted, growled, or muttered in my direction. More than the chants and heckles that followed me through high school, I remember the whispers of an 8th grade boy a year older than me, his name was Tom, who would sit behind me on the school bus and coo between the seats that he was going to kill me. Woven into the tapestry of his promise was his name for me, faggot. Frozen in my seat, I didn't say a word. I wonder if he still remembers. A murmuring came from the stall next to mine. Oh, wow. Okay. Every time someone... Kansas City, Missouri. A murmuring came from the stall next to mine. Every time someone flushed, a message, barely audible, floated through the smoky air of the truck stop restroom, and I sat in my stall, staring through the grayish-yellow air at a crushed cigarette butt and black ash soaking in urine on the floor, straining to hear his whispers through the muffled classic rock coming from dusty amplifiers in the ceiling. Someone flushed again. Yes, he was speaking to me, inviting me over. My stomach curled up and seemed to press against my spine. Now, in every hanging silence, I was the one flushing, impulsively testing my neighbor to see if I could get another message. Then another, like I was feeding quarters into a jukebox. The thrill fell somewhere between titillation and revulsion, a feeling I knew well. Transfixed, my mind flashing through all the possible outcomes of going over there, I finally resolved to flush a final time and scurried from the stall. That blend of fear and arousal still tickling in my lower back nearly sent me running out the bathroom door as if a ghost was behind me, chasing me into the soda aisle. But that's where I lingered, at least for a little while, because part of me wanted to see him. Not so much to determine whether or not I should have taken him up on his offer, but because I just wanted to see his face, just to see. To pass the time, I made small talk with an employee, asking if she knew of any pianos in this town called Peculiar. She shook her head. Can't think of any pianos in Peculiar. Maybe a church? My eyes kept darting to the bathroom door to see if he or anyone else was coming out, but no one ever did. Not while I was there. In a cheap motel on the outskirts of Kansas City, I'm looking at pictures on my laptop. Straight porn, as it were. Anything to erase the restroom episode from earlier today, and I'm working away at myself like a teenager, but I don't finish. I won't. I rarely do. I haven't finished in months, paranoid that the orgasm might poison my music, make my delivery of it somehow less urgent. I tell myself that I play best when I want to F everyone in the audience, the composers themselves, the notes on the page. I tell myself that I like to play when I'm backed up and ready to burst, so I edge for hours teetering on the point of release and then stop, saving myself for America 88 by 50. I pulled in front of an Oriental rug store with a Steinway in the window and pulled a promotional photo and CD from the trunk. When I opened the huge glass front doors, a Shih Tzu trotted toward me, and then a dark older man helping two elderly customers in the back looked my way. He appeared about 40 years old, longish slicked back hair with gray streaks, purple tank top, and a gap in his teeth. He left the couple to their decision and approached me, extending a hand, his voice soft and smooth. "Name's Bruce. Can I help you?" I told him about the tour. "Ah," he smiled and tilted his head back like I'd reminded him of something familiar. Then he stopped, eyebrows furrowed. "So wait, what is it you're doing again?" I explained the tour again. He scratched his chin, then Bruce had an idea. "We have a first Friday every month on this street. The galleries stay open late, thousands of people walk around, and most places feature music or something." He motioned toward the grand piano in the window. "I usually sing, and people just come in and out, but you could do something instead, I imagine." I agreed and then stopped myself short. "But does that mean..." "Yeah, it means you're playing tonight." I spent the afternoon practicing in a nearby park on my silent keyboard. Curious spectators stopped to watch, and I'd take the opportunity to invite them to the concert. When I returned to the store, I saw that Bruce had set up a small display at the entrance, a side table with concert programs, a stack of my CDs, and a jar to put donations in. My glossy black and white headshot rested against a vase stemming with white flowers. I told him that I liked it, but that it looked like I'd died. This was my memorial. "The arts are in real trouble," he said a few minutes later after brewing some tea. "I mean, we have an okay art scene here, a lot of galleries and so on, but there's no classical music. It's so exclusive that no one hears it." I told him about the generally positive responses I'd gotten from audience so far and how this had actually surprised me. "People are just hungry," he said. "I sang 12 Schubert songs one Friday, and the people, they just came in and they were like, odd. Farm boys, art folk. It didn't matter. They just ate it up. It was like as if suddenly Schubert was radical music. We all went through this transcendental experience with it. And that's what's important, I think, in music, when it stops being music and turns into something more than music." Bruce crossed one leg over the other, shaking it like he had some kind of nervous twitch. The heel of his cowboy boot tapped on the floor. I asked why he bought the Steinway. "I went to school, but..." He shook his head. "I just went crazy. It was like little boy coming to the city. I smoked a lot of pot and didn't take advantage of the opportunities I could have had. The singing thing." He motioned to the piano. "I've only come back to it in the past 8 years since my partner died." There was silence. "Of AIDS," he continued, answering the question I didn't ask. "So I put the piano in here so that every first Friday I'd have to sing." He brought his gaze back to me. I sort of do what you do. We have to make it for ourselves, right? Even though people, artsy people, they come in here and think, well, he deals rugs. He must do well, so what right does he have to get involved with our scene? That kind of thing rubs off on me. I have an upcoming performance with the Civic Opera singing Mahler. He shrugged and sighed. I still feel like an imposter. I understand, I said. He squinted his eyes with a dubious expression, like he knew something better than me. Maybe you're just scared to acknowledge your gift like I was, because if you accept it, then you have a responsibility not to waste it. The little whispers, the footsteps, the people entering and leaving and staring through the window unhinges my mind away from its usual mid-performance task of turning the next note into some oppressive mystery. Are you sure? And with my mind distracted and the addiction to self-test and self-destruct out of the way, my playing happens almost automatically, even beautifully. I'm not thinking anymore. A man enters wearing a polo shirt, khaki shorts, and sunglasses. His wife, whom I only see in the corner of my eye, is dressed in something bright green. "Oh my God!" she shrieks, probably surprised, maybe even charmed by the scene she's stumbled upon. A piano recital in an Oriental rug store. Bill, look at these rugs. My God. By now, Bill has begun circling behind me, looking at the rugs, but mostly chatting on his cell phone, which has already rung twice during the softest moments of my Hinastera preludes. Yeah, so where are you? Oh, we're in a rug store. Oriental rugs. Yeah, flying carpet store. We're getting on a flying carpet. Going away on a flying carpet. A male voice from the audience shudders. Please. Lexington, Kentucky. On my way to Kentucky, I stopped at a gas station somewhere in southern Illinois to fill up the tank. Barely noticing the small town I'd stopped in, I turned on the pump and ran inside to use the bathroom. I came out of the little room in the back of the store a few minutes later to find the attendant, an older woman with her hair in a bun, calmly pointing from behind the cash register out the window toward my Hyundai, sitting in a lake of gasoline, the tank and nozzle overflowing in a spectacular shower of fuel in all directions. "Why didn't it turn off?" I shouted, bolting toward the glass door. Then, as I tore it open, "Why didn't you turn it off?" Then, sprinting toward the fountaining spectacle, "Jesus, turn it off!" Several townspeople were already running to the scene with buckets of soapy water and large brushes. I pulled the dripping nozzle from the tank and placed it back on its harness, glancing at the purchase total, over $70. Please stay at the pump while filling," a sign read. "We are not responsible for spills." I needed to get out of there. Wading through the pool of gasoline to my driver's side door, I waved obliviously to the panicked cleanup crew. "Thanks, guys!" and lowered myself into the car, sneakers and cuffs soaked. Holding my breath, I turned the key as a headline flashed across my mind. "Pianist perishes in a gas station disaster, town leveled." But the car started without detonating, and I pulled away slowly, gas dripping from my tires and trailing behind me. I watched as the crowd made the mess and whatever authorities were on their way shrink in the rearview mirror. This seemed to sum up my relationship with the people and places of America 88 by 50. I'd sweep in for a couple minutes, briefly skirt disaster, and then disappear with a few souls temporarily affected, for better or worse. As for Kentucky, my concert would serve all of 3 people of Lexington. The 3 women sat in the front row, muttering niceties. Our own private concert. I approached the piano, a Boston baby grand piano standing alone and embarrassed in the middle of the stark gallery. "I think we're going to start now," I interrupted with a whisper, and they sat up. After Ives's 3-page sonata, one of the women, she had short hair and wore an aqua shawl, raised her hand as if she was in a classroom. This was a first. I pointed at her like a school teacher. "Yes." "So angry," she stated, frowning. "I sense anger." One of the women, Helene, gave me a ride after to the concert to a small upscale restaurant a few blocks from the gallery. On the way, she described her work as an abstract painter and said that she'd connected with the music on the program, particularly the Copland, and this surprised her. I listened to Copland once, and I don't know what it was, but I just said, "This isn't for me," and I never cared to listen to him again, but something about tonight and what you played, it was tender yet jagged. I suddenly heard it, she said, clasping her hands over the steering wheel. "I heard him." "I'm glad you were there," I said, like when just a few people show up. There's a different energy to the show and intimacy. "Well, the right people were there," she said. "That's true." You know, I love nights like this. I got an email from the gallery this afternoon, invited my 2 friends, and now here we are after a surprise concert of totally enlightening music, and we're going to a dinner. We joined Helene's 2 other friends and Jim, the executive director of Art Space, at a round table outside the restaurant. Jim, with wine, had melted from the stoic man I'd previously met at the gallery into a colorful prankster who could momentarily entertain one subject before turning another 2 seconds later. Gay, I told myself. He was definitely gay. It was so exotic and foreign, the idea that someone could be out of the closet. What was it like? What did it feel like to be Jim? Was it the same as how it felt to be Bart in Raton, or Michael in Spencer, or Bruce in Kansas City? How did it feel? A car thumped by, its bass rattling our silverware. Over the music, Helene tried to address the table, nearly shouting, "Do you remember when that woman went to court for playing her car stereo too loud, and the judge sentenced her to a year without music in her car?" "Only in Kentucky," Jim laughed. Helene mused, "That guy in the car making us all listen to his music, is he doing it as a performance? Is that his self-expression? Or is it a power thing?" "Yes," interjected Jim brusquely, "it's a power thing. Only someone who has no power over anything in their life forces other people to listen to their music." I gulped. And then a fountain shot up in front of what looked like a courthouse. Even though it was late, children appeared and began dashing through the fountain as colored lights flashed. They wanted to put in a very abstract sculpture there, but the city said, "No way," Helene said, turning around to see what had distracted me. "So they put in those fountains, and it's become a real hit." She slumped a little in her chair, her gaze returning to the table. "Water's always nice." "That's an art piece right in front of it," her short-haired friend said, pointing. I squinted. "What, the newspaper stands?" Before she could answer, Jim put another revelation to the table. You play the piano with your sex chi, Adam. Did they teach you that at Indiana? Or did you pick that up out here on the road?" I nearly choked on my wine. I need my whole body to play. "This isn't politics, dear," he vamped. "We're all friends here." "Adam's shy," Helene purred, though I can't imagine what anyone would need to be shy about at age 23. I scanned my memory for examples. The Vermont forest with that tattooed cop, the baseball dugout with, "He doesn't need to tell you anything," Jim laughed. "You get a play-by-play of it just watching him at the piano." The table erupted into laughter, almost seeming to toast the idea. "No, seriously, Adam," he said, suddenly quiet and piercing me with a glare I didn't yet know he was capable of. "You don't have a closet. You have a vault." Our eyes were locked, and in the space of a breath, the only sound in Lexington, nearly imperceptible, was that of each lady at the table swallowing her wine. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here and sharing the end of this festival together. Let's have some coffee and continue the conversation, and I encourage you to pick up these books if you're interested, which the bookstore has so kindly ordered and has in stock. And on that note, a huge thank you to Buffalo Street Books for hosting this event and bringing such a nice communal atmosphere to the end of this festival. So thank you, Buffalo Street Books.